Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today I'm here with a product review video. Recently, Arteza reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to check out some of their products, and I agreed to do so. Now, I am going to give you a heads up. I will not share anything on my channel that I don't love or I don't like, so this should be a good indication that I was actually enjoying what they sent me. But we have a few things to talk about. So I don't normally watercolor. It's not that I can't. It's just not something I normally do. I normally lend more towards Copic markers. However, I do own Zig Clean Color Real Brush Pens as well as Tombow Dual Brush markers. So we're going to be taking a look at those in comparison to the Arteza products. Now, this is what they sent me. They sent me the 24 pack of their Real Brush Pens as well as a 6 pack of their water brushes and a couple of watercolor pads. I'm going to take a look at each of these individually to start with, and then we'll start taking a look at them as a whole. Now, these were just straight out of the box, the shipping box. I had not opened these yet. I really wanted to save these for on camera so I can go through all of it with you. So I have no preconceived notions about this. I have no idea what they're going to be like. So this is the box that they come in, the Real Brush markers come in. And right off the bat, I can already tell that they are in trays. And I really enjoy that. I think that is really nice if you're going to keep, if you like to keep the packaging to your products. This is actually pretty handy. These are fairly sturdy trays. I think in the long run, they'd probably work okay. Now, me personally, I already know that I'm going to transfer them to different type of storage, but this isn't bad. This would be great for traveling. The other thing that I noticed is that they don't have any names. They don't have any numbers. So I know that I'm going to have to come up with my own numbering system, but that's not a big deal. That works for me. If it's not important to you, then you're good to go out the gate. So I'm actually going to right away, I'm going to compare this to a Zig Clean Color Real Brush marker, because when I look at these, I don't think Tombow. I immediately think of the Clean Color Real Brush pens because of the style of them. Now, we'll talk more about formula and the watercoloring in general later, but right now, the first thing I want to take a look at is the difference between this and the Zig. Now, the Zig is smaller. I don't know how much product is in either one of these barrels. They could have the same amount. I don't know. The other thing is the Zig markers have a very much finer point to them. They're shorter bristles than this. And again, we'll talk more about that here after a bit. That's just my first impression. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to move on to the water brushes, and these are kind of groovy. Like there's 6 of them in the package, and I would also like to note, folks, that the price points for Arteza products are actually pretty reasonable. You should absolutely check out their website, and I will have links to all of this below in the description as well as over on my blog. So this particular package, there's 6 in total, but there's 2 different styles. So there's 3 of each style, and I'm going to get this opened up and we'll take a look at what that means. So the first thing I noticed about these are where you squeeze the barrel, it's kind of soft. It's almost like a silicone type. So that's kind of cool. I'm impressed with that. And then also I have to take a look at the tips and compare those to what I already have. But also what I noticed was the inside of the barrel is different, and we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. But first, what I want to do is I want to compare these to what I have on hand now. There are tons and tons of water brushes out there on the market, folks. There's tons of them. And you could get them at any price points you could possibly dream of. These are the ones that I have. And there's a couple of these that I've used for ages and ages. Now, this yellow one, this is by Zig. This is their water brush. And I have used this so much that the bristles on it are permanently stained. And then this one is I think I got this one from Simon Says Stamp. Yes, I did. This came in a card kit I think sometime last year. And what I liked about this was I liked the amount of water that it would hold, and it actually had a pretty decent, some pretty decent bristles on it. Now this one is a Tonic Nuvo Aqua brush, and I just recently got this one. I haven't used it. I believe they call this one the medium. And it definitely compares to the Arteza in that the one that I just picked up there, that one was also medium. And honestly, I couldn't tell the difference between the two of them. So there's a large, a medium, and a small, or large, medium, and small. And it's a pretty good difference between the three of them. Like you can legit call those large, medium, and small. I have gotten some water brushes in the past that I immediately threw in the trash. They said they were small, and they were actually pretty wide or pretty large. And I have no use for that. So anyway, let's move on. Now, these ones are wider. So these are more like instead of a fine point, they have a fan tip to them. And these are also the large, medium, and small. And this is true. You can definitely tell the difference between them. And what I was curious about when I first saw these was what prevents all of that water from just gushing out these broad fan tips. So I took that lid off, and there's a thing inside the medium and the large one, and it looks like what it does is it helps prevent all of that water from flowing out all at once. Now, I didn't use those for this review, but I'm curious how well that works here in the future. So now let's take a look at these watercolor pads. The first thing is I got two of them, and you can actually buy a 2-pack on their website, which is pretty cool. They're 32 sheets. They're 9 inches by 12 inches, and they're kind of an ivory color. In fact, if you own Simon Says Stamp ivory cardstock, or if you're at all familiar with it, it is identical to that. That is exactly the color of this watercolor paper. It's 140 pounds. There is a textured side and a smooth side. The textured side is more like a linen, which is kind of cool. So the first thing I did was I swatched all of these out. I did not use a water brush when I swatched them out. I used a silver in number 2 watercolor brush for it because I wanted to give you my first thoughts on their watercolor brush on camera. And also, this is where I took a moment to come up with my own numbering system. So I left them in the trays. The one that was up front on the front facing of the packaging, I started number 1, worked left to right on both trays, and then I put them in rainbow order when I swatched them out. So the numbers on my swatches aren't in order, but it's the only thing that made sense to me when I was taking them out of the package so I could keep them straight in my mind. So you can kind of see right here where that says number 1. That was the first one that was on that tray, so that's what I started with. I also punched some little stickers and wrote the numbers on the top of my pen, and then colored that in so I would have a swatch there. And then also did swatches on the Arteza Watercolor Paper. They're 2x2 squares, numbered those. It was actually a pretty easy system. We'll talk more about how I felt about the watercoloring here in a minute. For now, this is what we're going to take a look at. I'm going to do a project for you during the video because I really wanted to get a good feel for these. And these were the colors that I chose. I already knew what stamp set and all that I was going to use. So these are the colors I chose, and I compared the Arteza colors to Zig and to Tombow as well. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute. Now, I did swatch these out on Strathmore Bristol paper. So there is a little bit of a difference between the two types of papers, but not much. I think primarily color. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be using the Hero Arts Hummingbird stamp set. I think this stamp set sells out like crazy. So you should totally get your hands on this the moment it's in stock because it's awesome. I'm also going to be using the W+9 Love Shower Layers die set. I'm just going to be using that larger die, the tag die that's in this to just be making some little shaped note cards. I was trying to keep this as simple as I possibly could, so it didn't take me forever to get this done. Now, all I did with these was stamp these in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then I heat emboss them with Hero Arts clear embossing powder. I didn't do any masking or anything like that, and I didn't show you any of that because you've probably seen it a million times. And again, I was trying to save as much time as I possibly could because we already have a long video here, folks. So the first thing I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with obviously the Arteza colors and one of the Arteza Water Brushes, and I use the smallest one to begin with. Now, I'm going to be honest, I feel kind of rusty here because I haven't watercolored in ages. However, one of the things that I liked about these is although I haven't watercolored in so long, I didn't feel like the watercolor was trying to control me. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, where you've used a type of watercolor and it's just, if you're not on your game, it is just out of control right away. That being said, I did take it slow and try to be a little conservative. And I'm also taking the approach that these are like zigs. They're not. They have a lot of the same property as zigs. The colors are definitely comparable to zig, but they work just a tiny bit differently. Now, with a zig, if I were to touch the water to the brush, the zigs would immediately spread out. This doesn't. You have the opportunity to kind of pull this out and work with it. You have a lot more control with these than what you do with the zigs, but the colors still stay really vibrant and they still have a lot of pop to them, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Now, I am doing a wet on dry technique. So I'm laying the color down with my markers. And this is where I'd like to point out that although zigs are a little bit finer than the Arteza, I didn't see a problem here. Even with these fine little images, I didn't notice a difference in that at all. And then I take my water brush in and I'm wetting the area, and I wet it in the direction I want the water to flow or I want the color to flow. And then as soon as that water touches that color, then I can go in and pull that out just barely with the tip of my water brush. Now, the water coming out of this water brush, it's not bad. It actually has a decent amount of control. I do have a paper towel off to the side there that I do gently tap it off every once in a while. And that's another thing that I notice. The zigs, there's so much pigment in it that it has a tendency to stain your water brush. These don't. The other thing is as I wipe that off on my paper towel, I don't see a lot left on the paper towel. So that's very interesting to me, but there's still a lot of color on my paper, which, by the way, this is the Arteza Watercolor Paper, in case I hadn't mentioned that. So now I want to see how it blends together with other colors. So I started with more of a green color, and then I decided to bring in a blue, and to see how these two would blend together. It blends beautifully. It actually blends really well with zig, occasionally with Tombos. Sometimes it's hard to get those to get a good blend. Not with these. These actually blended really well. Another thing that I noticed with zigs in particular, occasionally with Tombow, if I get ahead of myself, so if I'm doing the wet to dry and I take my color to my paper, and if I color in too much before I'm ready to bring in any water, it absorbs into that paper and then I can't blend it out very well later. Now, that being said, I do know that sometimes that has to do with your paper. Absolutely. But I've even used other higher quality watercolor papers that I still have a hard time with that blend. Now, I have heard that Bristol watercolor paper is excellent for that kind of technique regardless of what you use, but I don't know 100% for certain because I've never tried it. I'm just strictly talking about this compared to what I've used on the Arteza paper with the Arteza markers. So far, so good. So at this point, I have some of the marker on an acrylic block up here, up by my hand there, and I am just taking the tip of that brush, picking up some of that color with it, and then just putting it back on to my project here. My water brush is actually pretty dry at this point because now I'm just going in to add in more of those shadows, a little bit more depth. And I'm still thoroughly enjoying how this is blending out. Now, here's something else I wanted to try. And this I do occasionally struggle with the zigs. I took that marker back to my coloring and I put it directly over the top and blended it out. Sometimes, and it's not 100% dry. Sometimes with the zigs, I can't do that. I just end up with this really dark spot that I can't get rid of. It could be user error, but that's my impression. So now I'm bringing in some other colors here and I'm just going to keep coloring this. I'm not really focused on how this turns out. I'm happy with how they turned out, but that's not really what is in the forefront of my mind. Right now, I am just simply going through and using the product with how I'm used to using my other products. And I'm kind of noting the differences and the similarities. But overall, I am thoroughly impressed with these. I really enjoyed how these worked. I think that if you're looking for a really good alternative to zigs, this is the way to go. Like these were super great. You can't go wrong with these. They also have them in 48 and 96 packs as well. Honestly, I don't watercolor enough to justify the larger packages, but I think that they could be super fun and I'd be really interested in seeing what other colors are in them. Also with this, these blend together enough that I think that even with the 24, you could probably make your own colors, but I don't think that you can go wrong with any of them. So I'm just going to finish this little guy off, and I didn't bother blending out his little beak and his little feet, and I think hummingbirds actually have black beaks, but whatevs. This is my card, and I wanted a little bit of pop of yellow on here, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to show you these flowers really quick, and I do have this sped up pretty fast because this was overall, I would consider this a really simple watercoloring. Now, the thing to keep in mind with watercoloring, any watercoloring, is the whole point is you don't have any control. I'm a control freak, so I'm so used to coloring with Copics, and I have control with Copics. So I have a tendency to take the same approach with watercolors, and that's not necessarily smart. However, I do love that these are super simple to use. So I put in that lighter pink, and you could see that I was blending that water, the clean water, down towards the pigment, and it didn't have a whole lot of bloom. So if you want a little bit more control and you want a little bit more predictability, these are a really good way to go. Or if you aren't, if you've never watercolored, if you're new to watercoloring, or you don't watercolor very often, these are perfect for that. Because I do have this sped up to so fast that it's hard to tell, but I am waiting for each of those colors to dry just a little bit before I add any more pigment to them. Because with Arteza, it is, if you try to put them over the top of a damp cardstock, they're not very bright then. I think that would probably be the only downside I would see to these, but that's okay because as soon as it dries back a little bit, you can still go direct to paper with them and you still get all of that color and that pigment, and it's awesome. It's perfect. So since I already started the first flower out the same, I decided to finish them all the same way. So I start with the light pink. I go in with a little bit darker pink. This is the equivalent of wine red in Zigs, and also wine red in Tombow. And I've also noticed a couple other things at this point. Now, I haven't put a ton of water on any of this because it's so small, you don't need to. However, I've noticed with a couple of other watercolor papers that even at this point, I would start to see a little bit of pilling because I do keep going back and I do keep adding a little bit more water here and there. And then also, I keep working at it with my brush. So at that point, you start to see the paper start to pill up. In some cases, it's very minute. This paper is not doing that. Now, I do think you could probably get it to the point where it would. However, so far, so good. And that is one of my biggest pet peeves. I can't stand it when watercolor cardstock does that. And this is really great. Also, the tip on this brush pen or this water brush is it's awesome. It's holding up really well. Now, I haven't done tons of coloring with it, but I've also had water brush pens in the past that I would get to this point and the end of my water brush would start to fray. This is actually holding up really good, and I'm super impressed with that. So I'm just going to finish off this last little flower. I haven't done anything different with it. At this point, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do a full wash on the background or how I want to finish this off. At the end of the day, I decided to just leave it as it was because I had already put enough work into all of it that I didn't want to add any more if it wasn't necessary. I am looking forward in the future to using those other water brushes and then also seeing how these work on different types of watercolor paper as well. As far as color choices are concerned, I really like these. I truly feel that they are comparable to Zig and the Tombow dual brush pens. And I really think that they're bold and vibrant enough on their own that they are really work well. I am also enjoying how they're blending together. When I first put down that lighter pink color, I was totally floored. It was super bright pink, but it actually blends out really well. And it blends beautifully with this wine red color. And this is another place that I really noticed how well they blend together. I kind of picked it up a little bit on that bird, especially since I was going with that blue-green and the darker blue. But on these leaves, I can see a difference here as well in how they blend. And I don't always see a great blend with the Zigs. Sometimes I have to work a little bit harder with the Tombow, but this was great. So I started with one green color, and I'm just gonna blend that out over all of my my leaves here. And then I'm going to take the other green and I'm going directly over the top of this. I let it sit, I don't know, probably about 30-45 seconds. And then I went direct over the top of that damp cardstock on those leaves. And then I'm going to blend that out. And I blended out just a tiny, tiny bit. It's kind of hard to tell as fast as I'm going, but I actually don't completely cover the whole leaf. I let some of that other color shine through, and it looks amazing. So I did do two other cards just like this. One of the cards I did with the Arteza Watercolor Paper, the Arteza colors, and my silver #2 round brush. And I honestly didn't notice too much of a difference between the water brush and the silver watercolor brush. I really didn't. I think the biggest thing is that silver is so fine that I could get into those tiny little nooks and crannies a wee bit easier, but overall I didn't notice a difference. That watercolor brush or that water brush is actually, it's pretty cool. It's definitely something that if I were traveling with, I would definitely pick it up and take it with me because it worked great. It was handy. The other card that I do with the Zig Clean Color Real Brush Pens on the Arteza Watercolor Paper. I cannot talk today, folks. I'm sorry. And I use a water brush on the Arteza Water Brush on that. Again, it worked fabulous. The only thing is it did start to stain the tip of my watercolor brush, but I talked about that earlier, and I totally expected that to happen. Here's something I noticed. Normally when I do a drop shadow in watercolor, especially with Zig, when I blend that out and I try to fade it out to whatever color cardstock or whatever color watercolor paper I'm working on, it will actually leave a harsh line or somewhat of a harsh line when it dries back. These didn't do that. That was awesome to me. I love that because while I like the idea of a watercolor look, there's some things that I want a smooth look, and that's one of them. I don't like a harsh line on a drop shadow. That might be a throwback to my Copic coloring, but I just don't like how it looks, and these didn't do that at all. I did use the black that came with the Arteza set, and I watered it down a little bit. It was watered down to a gorgeous gray. And again, it didn't leave that harsh line, so that was awesome. So I'm just going to finish this up, and I don't show you how I did the other two cards on camera because, again, I was trying to minimize the amount of time that this video took as it was. But I gotta give this a total thumbs up, folks. These products are really fantastic. If you're definitely looking for a good alternative, or if you just want to own these alongside your Zigs and your Tombow, I absolutely feel like these have their own place. I think that they're totally worth it, and I honestly think that you can't go wrong with them. Okay, I am going to show you how I finish this off just in case you would like to do these yourself. So the first thing I did on all three of them was I took the Nuvo clear glitter gloss and I went over just the highlights on all of the images, including the bird. And here's something that I noticed. I am using that glitter gloss over the top of this watercoloring, and it does move it just a tiny bit. This is the Arteza. With the zigs, it would actually move it quite a bit. So I thought that was cool. I do make sure that I keep cleaning off the tip of my brush there when I move on to a different color. But overall, it was actually pretty minimal. And I love that because that meant that I could put on loads of glitter. And that's one of my favorite things to do. So that was pretty cool. And I definitely wanted to share that with you. Now I was just kind of showing you the tip of that to kind of give you an idea how much glitter I had on there because it was a lot. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clear jelly roll pen and I am going to go over his little beak and his little feet on all three cards to give him a little bit of dimension, a little bit more character. And I'm just making sure that I give a good coating there. You could definitely use Ranger Glossy Accents if you like. You can use anything that you want to kind of build up a little bit of dimension there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a black jelly roll pen and I'm going to add some dots to this. I decided instead of adding any more like a wash or any ink blending or anything like that, I decided to keep these as clean as possible because I really wanted that watercolor to really take center stage. And this hummingbirds and these flowers are so darling. I cannot get over them. So what I do with the jelly roll pen is I just hold it straight up and down and I just kind of hold it there until I see that ink kind of pull up a little bit and then I pull it straight up and it gives these perfect little dots to it. And I really thought that that finished that off really well. Again, I do the same thing to all three of these. And then I took some ribbon and I added that to the top of all of my cards. I doubled that up because I wanted to add a little bit of bulk there. And now I have some Simon Says Stamp Ivory cardstock. I am specifically using this because I wanted you guys to see how close those colors are. I can't tell a difference. I have that cardstock folded in half. Then I took it over to my die cutting machine and I ran it through just like that. So the top of that stuck out the top of that fold. And then once it was done, it's in the same exact shape as my tag here. Now I'm going to mount that tag to the front of this. You could actually leave your tag just the way it was. You didn't need to put a base on it. I like having little note cards laying around and I am in love with any type of shaped card. So this is generally the route I go, but you could certainly leave it. So now I'm adding my adhesive to that card base. I'm lining up the bottom first because the tops aren't the same shape. And I'm looking at that right and left side down at the bottom of it. And as soon as I see that those two are lined up, I can simply lay the rest of it down flat and it's perfect. Now we're going to take a closer look at these three. And you're probably not going to be able to tell a difference between them. So this was the Arteza with the Arteza brush on the Arteza watercolor cardstock. And I think, again, I can't say it enough, folks. I was Thoroughly impressed. Can't go wrong. I love how these turned out. This was the Arteza with the silver brush. Can't tell a difference between the two of them. Honestly, I think for me, it was more about feel as opposed to a visual thing. Now, these are the zigs with, and I have silver brush written up there on my little note. That's a lie. I use the Arteza brush. So this is a side-by-side comparison to them both. I can't see too much of a difference. The colors are maybe tiny bit different, maybe. But outside of that, they're really close. Like if you didn't know what you were looking at, or if you hadn't been told, you wouldn't be any wiser to it. So that's actually pretty fabulous. All right, folks, we're done. We are good to go. I will have more details and links for you over on my blog as well as in the description below, including a discount code to Arteza if you're interested in picking these up. And I strongly suggest that you do because this was such a great review. These are totally worth it. I hope you enjoyed my cards today. If you did, be sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.